Whether employed by industry, academics, or government service, 3/5 of all U.S. scientists and engineers were now funded in some way by the federal government. In order to convince the American citizens that there were advantages to this very costly venture, federal agencies developed a concept of spin-off. Spin-offs are simply secondary or incidental products or effects derived from technological development in a somewhat unrelated area. When spin-off products began to emerge from space technologies, NASA considered the possibility of an annual report to present to the congressional budget hearings. The result was a black and white Technology Utilization Program report published in 1973, followed by another one in 1974. The reports generated such a keen interest by the public that NASA decided to make them into an attractive publication. Thus, the first 4-color edition of Spin-Off was published in 1976. Each year since, a new issue has highlighted the transfer of NASA technology to the private sector. NASA's Spin-Off publication accomplishes several goals. First, it is a convincing justification for the continued expenditure of NASA funds. It serves as a tool to educate the media and the general public by informing them about the benefits and dispelling the myth of wasted taxpayer dollars. It reinforces interest in space exploration, and it demonstrates the possibility to apply aerospace technology in different environments. It highlights the ingenuity of American inventors, entrepreneurs, and application engineers, and the willingness of a government agency to assist them. And finally, it continues to ensure global competitiveness and technological leadership by the United States. Today, NASA also offers a website devoted to publicizing and archiving information on each spin-off through the years. Let's start by looking at the example from our text on the progression of spin-offs in aeronautics between 1945 and 1990. Douglas, Lockheed, and Convair built most of the aircraft used during World War II and continued to be major suppliers after the war, but they also learned how to convert their designs and production facilities to meet the needs of commercial airlines. Commercial propeller-driven planes became faster as they added more engines. More engines on the plane meant more fuel for each flight. However, new refining processes created during the war meant cheaper fuel. Faster planes with large hauling capacity, longer flight times, and fuel efficiency were developed for military purposes, but the net result was a reduction in fares charged to passengers and a reduction of the time spent traveling from one airport to another, and an increase in non-stop flights. Turbine engines were also a spin-off from military research and development. During the war, several aircraft companies designed and tested a new type of gas turbine engine. The Lockheed P-80 was one of those planes and proved that jet aircraft had the potential for greater speed, faster climbs, and could be operated at higher altitudes. During the decade between 1945 and 1955, more intense research and development led to intercontinental bombers that were capable of carrying bombs non-stop from the U.S. to the Soviet Union. For commercial purposes, these planes were not practical since they required a large amount of fuel and very long runways for takeoff. These issues led to the development of the axial flow engine, which solved both issues. Planes were one of the largest contributors to winning World War II, but the Cold War led to a different kind of race. the race to space. In 1955, a group of scientists persuaded President Eisenhower that it would bring great international prestige to the U.S. if they were able to succeed in launching an artificial satellite into space during the International Geophysical Year, which was an 18-month period from July 1957 through December 1958. Time was lost while the Armed Service Divisions bickered over whose missile development team would be selected for the task, and the Soviets beat them to the punch and launched Sputnik 1 into orbit 4 months before America's Explorer 1. The launch of Sputnik was cause for embarrassment, but also fear, so Eisenhower proposed to Congress that a new agency be created, a civilian agency devoted entirely to space exploration for peaceful purposes as well as defense. On July 29, 1958, NASA was created and within a few weeks announced plans to begin launching communications satellites and to put an astronaut into orbit. Wernher von Braun and his team, which consisted of dozens of scientists and thousands of engineers and technicians, were reassigned from the Army to NASA. However, on April 12, 1961, the Soviets once again beat the U.S. and completed one full orbit of the Earth with a manned flight, 1 full year before John Glenn accomplished the same feat. In what is described as motives that were fundamentally political, President Kennedy was determined to beat the Russians at what had become their own space game. 8 years later, on July 20, 1969, millions of people all over the world watched their televisions in wonder as Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin planted the American flag on the moon and announced that they had taken one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. The Apollo program was the largest managed research project of all time, and the Apollo vehicle was equally huge. The Saturn V rocket had a diameter of 33 feet. 3 moving vans could have been driven side by side into the fuel tanks for the first stage. The height of 363 feet is about the same as a 36-story building. At liftoff, the vehicle weighed 6.1 million pounds, and when the 5 engines of the first stage were fired, they generated 7.5 million pounds of thrust. The pumps that sent the fuel and oxygen into the firing chambers generated the power of 30 diesel locomotives, and the engines had to be able to receive 3 tons of fuel per second to fire. To land on the moon, special tanks had to be developed to contain liquid gases at 423 degrees Fahrenheit. Special spacesuits were also required. Communication and tracking systems had to be developed, along with special tools that the astronauts would use to collect specimens and perform experiments. Just imagine the managerial efforts needed to prepare and coordinate the many, many details of this gargantuan project. During the 1970s and 1980s, Apollo 1 was followed by several other manned and unmanned missions to the moon. In addition, NASA managed the Skylab program and the Space Shuttle program. Various anti-war movements of the late 60s and 70s, the debilitating inflations of the 70s and 80s, and the end of the Cold War have all in one way or another taken the wind out of NASA's sails. NASA's budgets have been repeatedly cut back, and a good part of the nation's research effort has been diverted away from aeronautics and into medicine. While the military-industrial academic complex has not by any means disappeared, in the mid-90s it lost much of its commanding role both in the American economy and in the scientific and technological community. So, because of the research and development of products needed during wartime, then into the space initiative, many wonderful technologies were developed that have made everyday tasks easier and more convenient, giving us longer lives and less pain, and even transformed the production processes that make our widgets more affordable. There are those who wonder what might have been if those same funds would have been applied to curing disease, developing non-polluting vehicles, or solving world hunger. Looking back, some say that keeping a military superiority kept World War III at bay, while others say we should have won the war on cancer. While many people, sometimes entire communities, were devastated when the government work left, many other frontiers of opportunity were opened up because of the work that had been accomplished. Whether you agree or disagree with government and industry working together to become a technological power, you can't change the past. So enjoy the benefits of all the spin-offs that make your life a more comfortable place to live.